The beginnings of a medical school at Wake Forest University started as early as 1849 with an article in the Biblical Recorder urging the establishment of a medical department for the Wake Forest College to be located in Raleigh, North Carolina. There were no medical schools in the state at that time, so students headed north for medical training. The September 29, 1849 article says, "Tens of thousands of dollars that are annually sent out of the state and expended in preparing our young men for the practice of medicine might be kept at home, and an institution established at the seat of our state government with a faculty or corps of professors whose ability would reflect credit on an institution of the kind." 53 years later, 13 students made up the first medical class in 1902. Tuition was $37.50 per term, plus additional fees for laboratories and student health care. Between 1849 and 1902, Wake Forest established a course entitled Preliminary to the Study of Medicine. And in 1893, the Board of Trustees for the college gave serious consideration to establishing a medical school. The study of medicine class was held in the basement of this building, Lee Chemistry Laboratory, built in 1888. In 1933, the medical school moved to its own building, William Amos Johnson Medical Building. It was named after Dr. Johnson, who taught anatomy 1 year before he was killed in an automobile accident in 1926. Dr. Herbert Van, formerly employed as a Wake Forest professor from 1919 to 1926, replaced Dr. Johnson and stayed with the medical school until his death in 1951. Dr. Van and his new wife Mildred arrived in the town of Wake Forest in 1919 from New York City. And in 1979 Oral History, Mrs. Van reflects on her move to the town of Wake Forest when she says, "I was used to being raised in the heated furnace house, and they didn't have furnaces. You ran from one room to the other." So then, life progressed after that. Then gradually educated to the heat, furnaces putting in, and we gradually came to Winston-Salem. And speaking of Winston-Salem, it's hard to share the history of the medical school without sharing a little bit of North Carolina Baptist Hospital's history. In 1907, members of the Baptist denomination started talking about establishing the first charity hospital in North Carolina. The city of Winston-Salem is chosen as the location after the Chamber of Commerce agreed to provide a suitable building site and pledged $100,000 toward the construction of the facility. The site on which Baptist Hospital was built was known as the Wilds of Ardmore because it was an 11.2-acre undeveloped piece of land in the Ardmore section of Winston-Salem. The land was heavily wooded with a small brook. Only 2 houses faced the hospital, and there were 2 paved roads, Hawthorne and Queen Street. So, on May 28, 1923, Baptist Hospital held its dedication ceremony. It opened with 88 beds and 20 bassinets at a cost of $192,628. Meanwhile, the Council on Medical Education and the hospitals of the American Medical Association declared that they will not recognize any 2-year medical schools after 1937. In fact, they suggested closing those medical schools, which would have included Wake Forest, as well as the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But those organizations did not know Dr. Coy C. Carpenter. And in 1937, the medical school becomes Wake Forest School of Medical Sciences, with faculty and staff beginning the efforts of becoming a 4-year school. Here is the 1937-38 faculty. It appears that Dr. Carpenter had already started thinking about how to save Wake Forest School of Medical Sciences, because 2 years later, the school is offered $750,000 of common stock in the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company through the Bowman Gray Fund to establish a 4-year medical school in Winston-Salem. Obviously, the college trustees accepted the offer, and North Carolina Baptist Hospital's trustees invited the school to use the hospital for teaching and agreed to expand the beds from 88 to 150. The miracle on Hawthorne Hill is born. It should be noted that Dr. Carpenter was associated with Wake Forest Medical School for over 40 years. He was a 1922 graduate and was appointed professor of pathology and physical diagnosis in 1926. He served in many capacities, including dean of the medical school for nearly 25 years. He died in 1971. Dr. Carpenter's tenacity, along with his wife's loyalty and dedication to him and his cause, birthed the Bowman Gray School of Medicine in Winston-Salem in 1941. North Carolina Baptist Hospital Board of Trustees Chairman Egbert Davis Jr. in his oral history described Dr. Carpenter as a bull of the woods type individual, had great plans and thought them through and got them done quickly. He was a man of great vision, courageous, said 1940s alumni in their oral history. This concludes Part 1 of the History of Wake Forest University Medical School presentation. To hear more about the school's history, please view Parts 2 and 3. For further information, contact archivist Diane Johnson in the Dorothy Carpenter Medical Archives.